All right, well, even Rodney King says the LAPD has learned from the riots that went on there 20 years ago, that you won't see something like that again. Even just taking a look at the police force, what it looks like back then 20 years ago, 60% white. Today, minorities make up 60% of LA's police force. But what about the other cities? Like issues we just saw. Are they simply cases of a few bad apples? Or is there a larger trend here of police officers going too far? Tim Cavanaugh is a managing editor for Reason.com. Tim, it wasn't that long ago that we were showing police taking extreme measures to deal with those Occupy Wall Street protesters. We're talking now about police using weapons in many cases on unarmed people, oftentimes. What do you think is going on here?
I think we need better data, certainly. We've had this Amnesty International report recently citing 500 deaths at the hands of tasers. Taser International more or less maintains that nobody has died from tasers. Anytime something happens with, a non-lethal, it's always chalked up to some other thing, a previous heart condition, or the person's drunkenness, or he fell, down the stairs, or he banged his head 16 times. So, we need a better way of looking at these things. There is no doubt that a taser is less deadly than a lot of other ways you could use to subdue a person. But there are questions about are situations that in the past might have been resolved by, let's hang back and wait till this person calms down. Let's, pick him up at the next block after he runs out of breath, or something like that, become situations where officers clearly move in and just try and take, possession of a person in a way that they wouldn't have in the past. We have a lot of video of that. I mean, certainly if you look at many of the Occupy examples, as you mentioned, you have many cases where a person who was clearly not a threat was somebody that did not need, maybe should have been arrested for something, or, depending on how you feel about the law, but was not somebody who needed to be restrained as violently as they were. And
well, I think
fortunately, most of the videos we have, yeah, sorry.
No, I think it's a really good point. And just staying on the Amnesty International report that you mentioned, I think it was just released a couple months ago, showing that more than 500 people here in this country, in the U.S., have actually died after police officers used tasers on them. Another thing in that report, 90% of those people were unarmed suspects. I think most people would argue that, stun guns are better than real guns. But I guess I'm just wondering, at what point did they start being used as the first line of offense?
That is the real question. Now, you want to be clear, deaths in custody are more or less down. It's, there are fewer people dying at the hands of the police as part of arrest than there were 20 years ago. The number goes up and down, and it's also, as I said, is not always clear, because a lot of times the death in custody sort of gets attributed to something that, excuses whatever methods were used to restrain the person. But that is the big question. I mean, why do we have to have this kind of force against people who are not armed? One of the people I was happy to see Amnesty International mention was a guy that we did a lot of coverage of at Reason.com, at Reason TV. He's a guy in San Bernardino County named Alan Kephart. This gentle guy that, the whole community knew him as, almost like a Forrest Gump figure. He was tasered to death. He was tasered 19 times by, there were probes in his flesh to prove it. There's a civil case going on. The officers were all excused. All he is accused of, apparently, and the police reports are so opaque that it's been very hard to figure it out, but apparently all he did was honk at a sheriff who may or may not have cut him off in traffic, and he died for that.
Wow. And I think you just mentioned this, but I think it's a really important point to bring up. In so many of these cases, officers are either cleared or they're put on paid administrative leave. I think it's fair to say that incidents like this in the long run make police officers' jobs more difficult. I know, in my local news experience, so many people, when there was a crime committed, people could have helped with investigations. People could have told you who shot so-and-so, but they never did, because they said they didn't trust the police. I wonder if you think there's a discussion about some of the messages the police departments send when they continually, time and time again, let these officers off, put them on paid leave, let them stay home and get a paycheck.
Yeah, there are many opinions as there are police officers. You'll find some who, believe that good police work is the key to getting what you want, and it's not necessarily brute force or any of the other things. Unfortunately, all of the departments themselves are government agencies, and the first purpose of a government agency is to perpetuate itself and to excuse itself and to absolve itself of any responsibility for its failures. And the other big organizations involved in this are the police unions, and their job is just to make life easier for cops, regardless of whether the cops are doing their job properly or not. So,
just real quick, though, Tim, what's the answer here? Because certainly it stands to reason that police officers want to have, violent offenders afraid of them. So where is that line between, using a stun gun and doing nothing at all?
Yeah, well, having violent offenders afraid of them is fine. I don't know that all of the population should necessarily be afraid of the police. As you mentioned, that's one of the things that keeps people from cooperating. One thing that is working in our favor is that everybody has a camera, and there are a lot of cases out there. I mean, you can read Reason's coverage, again, on a great story we have called The War on Cameras. Everybody's got a phone, everybody's got a camera, a lot more stuff gets picked up. Rodney King, it was unusual 20 years ago for somebody to get video of something like this happening at the hands of police. And, it's quite possible that you will not see stuff like that nowadays. You're not going to see 6 or 4 officers, all beating a guy who's down on the ground. So, in a way, we may be moving forward. I want to emphasize that there are reasons to believe that we may have, fewer violent episodes going on.
I think
the issue is, do non-lethals really, lead to a lot more confrontational, violent resolutions than you would have seen in the past?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question.
There's reason to believe that. The case I mentioned is a perfect example. No matter, I think we can all agree, you should be allowed to honk at a police officer or even to mouth off to a police officer without paying for it with your life.
Totally agreed. Tim Cavanaugh, managing editor for Reason.com in our studios in Los Angeles. Thanks so much.
Thank you.